He was supposed to be my patient. But he somehow knew everything about me, my apartment, my mother's name, even the night I lied on my nursing report. I thought he was delusional. Until he told me what I'd be doing next week. How does the patient know my private life and future actions? The answer unfolds gradually. I never expected my life to change when Dr. Thomas Vexler called me personally. He was a retired psychologist who had suffered a partial paralysis after a lab accident years ago. Yet he spoke with a calm, unnervingly precise tone, almost as if he had rehearsed every word in advance. "You're exactly the type of nurse I want," he told me when we met in his study. "I've reviewed your profile. Your record is intriguing." I smiled, flattered at first. Few people took the time to scrutinize me so carefully, especially in my line of work. But then he added something that made me pause. "You leave your apartment light on when you're anxious. A habit you've had since your 20s. I laughed nervously, waving it off. Coincidence? Maybe my neighbor told you. But there was no neighbor. I knew every person in my building, and none had any reason to comment on my habits. Something about the way he said it made me shiver. He wasn't guessing. He knew. I shrugged it off and focused on the job. Caring for Dr. Vexler wasn't complicated on paper. He had a nurse, a live-in aide, and my job was short-term, private, just until he recovered some mobility. But the way he watched me when I entered the room made me tense. Not in a hostile way, but in a way that made me feel like a specimen under a microscope. His study was lined with books on psychology, neurology, and behavioral science. A faint scent of antiseptic mixed with old leather and musty paper filled the air. The blinds were drawn tight, even during the day, so the sunlight only highlighted the dust motes drifting lazily in the air. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his wheelchair. His eyes were piercing, a shade of blue so clear it almost hurt to look directly at them. I sat, hands folded on my lap. "I'm ready," I said, though my voice sounded shaky even to me. "You know," he began, leaning slightly forward, "I've always believed that people's habits tell more about them than their words. Your habit of leaving the light on, it's telling. It speaks of anxiety, anticipation, fear of the unknown. But also of guilt." My throat tightened. I hadn't confessed anything to this man. He didn't know my mother's name, the night I lied on my nursing report, or did he? I forced a laugh, trying to hide the sudden cold sweat on my palms. "You sound like you know me better than I know myself." "I do," he said simply, returning a serene, almost fatherly smile. The first night at his apartment was quiet, eerily so. He had a private suite where I was to stay nearby, a small space furnished modestly, just enough for a bed, a wardrobe, and a dresser. I unpacked in silence, trying not to imagine him listening to my every movement. Later, as I settled into my own apartment that night, my phone buzzed. A text from my neighbor. "Your living room light was on when I passed by. Everything okay?" My fingers trembled as I stared at the message. I had barely touched the switch after leaving for the day. And yet somehow, Dr. Vexler knew. Or someone did. I tossed the phone onto the bed, heart hammering. 1,000 questions ran through my mind. Was it surveillance? Some experimental technology? Or had I just become paranoid? Sleep was fitful. Every creak of my apartment building sounded like a warning. Every shadow seemed to linger too long. I kept checking my blinds, convinced someone was outside, watching. The next day, I returned to his apartment with a renewed sense of professionalism. I reminded myself I was a nurse, trained to remain calm, rational, even under pressure. Yet as soon as I stepped into his study, the same unsettling feeling returned, the sense that nothing I did went unnoticed. "You seem tense," he said casually, as though commenting on the weather. I shook my head. "Just adjusting." He nodded, unbothered. "Adjustment is good. Awareness is better." That night, I double-checked my apartment before sleeping. Lights off, doors locked, curtains drawn. Yet a gnawing unease remained. Even as I tried to calm myself with a book, a cup of tea, and breathing exercises, a small, insistent voice in my head whispered, "He knows. He knows everything." I had always been good at compartmentalizing, separating my personal life from my professional duties. But with Dr. Vexler, the walls I had built around my mind were crumbling. Every habit, every secret, every guilty memory I had carefully tucked away felt exposed, observed. By the third day, I realized the assignment wasn't just about his care. It was about me, my reactions, my fears, my guilt. And deep down, a part of me dreaded finding out just how much he really knew. Because I knew, even as I tried to convince myself otherwise, this was no ordinary patient. I noticed the recorder on his bedside table on my second week. At first, I thought it was just another piece of medical equipment, something required for documenting his vitals or maybe a cognitive therapy tool. But the way he positioned it, perfectly aligned, angled toward the bed, didn't feel accidental. It felt intentional, almost ceremonial. He noticed me staring at it. "That," he said, gently tapping the device, "is for dream recollection therapy." His voice was even, unthreatening, like he enjoyed watching me try to make sense of things. I forced a polite smile. "You record your dreams?" "I try," he replied. "It helps me understand what the subconscious chooses to retain." I nodded and left it alone. At least on the outside. Inside, my curiosity gnawed at me like a buzzing in my skull. Every night I adjusted his pillows, administered the medication, monitored his vitals. And every night, that recorder sat there, silent and ominous. He never asked me to touch it, never asked me to play anything back. He just wanted it there, always within reach. One night, a Wednesday, he drifted asleep unusually quickly. His medication sometimes caused drowsiness, but tonight was different. He didn't just fall asleep, it was as if he shut down, like a machine powering off. His breathing became slow, steady. Even. I began tidying up, keeping quiet. When I reached the bedside table, my elbow snagged the corner of his oxygen tube. I tried to catch it, and in the scramble, my hand brushed the recorder. It clicked. A soft beep. The screen lit up. Playback mode. My blood ran cold, I hadn't pressed anything. The recorder just started. I froze. And then I heard my voice. Eleanor woke up at 6:17. Coffee, 2 sugars. Wore blue scrubs. Looked at herself in the mirror longer than usual. My heart slammed into my ribcage. My breath stuttered in my throat. The timestamp showed 5:41 a.m. At that time, I was still at home. I hadn't even left for my shift yet. Every hair on my body stood on end. I stopped the recording and stepped back, nearly tripping over the foot of his bed. My hands were shaking, and I tried to steady my breathing, but it didn't work. I stared at the recorder like it was alive. How could he have recorded that before I even arrived? He couldn't have. He shouldn't have. I looked at him, asleep, unmoving, and for the first time since meeting him, I felt fear in my bones. Not discomfort. Not suspicion. Fear. I backed out of the room, closing the door as quietly as possible. Once I reached the hallway, I pressed my back against the wall, holding my chest to quiet the pounding. Did he bug my apartment? No. That didn't make sense. He couldn't move well enough to set anything up himself. Maybe someone else was following me. But why? Why me? The thought made me nauseous. The next morning, I arrived early, telling myself I'd do a normal shift, keep distance, pretend everything was fine. I was good at that, pretending normalcy. Pretending nothing haunted me. I made his tea, checked the meds, adjusted the curtains to let in light. "You're early," he said. His voice startled me, I didn't even hear him wake up. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. A small knowing smile. "You were up last night replaying possibilities in your head. But it's pointless to obsess over what you don't understand yet." My spine turned to glass. Yet. He knew I was thinking about the recorder. He knew I couldn't sleep. He knew too much. I should have confronted him right then, demanded answers, called my supervisor, walked out. But instead, I nodded and continued like nothing was wrong. Because if I left, part of me feared I would never get answers. Or worse, I was scared that leaving might prove I was the one losing my grip on reality. That night, I made a decision. I would check the recorder again. But this time, deliberately. I waited until after midnight. The house was unnervingly silent, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak and breath. His soft breathing carried through the stillness. The glow from the hallway light outlined his figure on the bed. I slipped inside. My pulse thrummed in my ears. I reached for the recorder. Before I touched it, he spoke. Without opening his eyes. Curiosity is not a flaw, Eleanor. I flinched. How long have you been awake? I whispered. I never sleep deeply when I'm being observed. I swallowed hard. Maybe it was the dim lighting, or the medication tray smell, but his presence felt bigger in the dark, heavier, like he was filling every inch of space. Why is my voice on your recorder? I forced out. He smiled without opening his eyes. Calm. Relaxed. Like this conversation was inevitable. Patterns, he said softly. People reveal more than they realize. Tone, pauses, word choice. I map behavior. That doesn't explain the recording, I snapped, whispering harshly, afraid of waking the walls. You think prediction requires sight? He asked, amused. Or proximity? My mouth went dry. You predicted my actions minute by minute? No, he corrected, opening his eyes to stare at me. I observed you until your subconscious did the predicting for me. I didn't understand, not fully, but I understood enough. He believed he could map behavior so precisely that he could predict it. But the part one couldn't shake. His voice didn't sound like someone experimenting. It sounded like someone playing with something fragile. Me. Why me? I whispered, my throat tight. He closed his eyes again, like the answer bored him. You were already cracked, he murmured. All I had to do was widen the fracture. The words hit me like physical force. All I had to do was widen the fracture. I stumbled backwards out of the room. Once outside, I pulled out my phone, searching online for anything about him, articles, old research projects, lawsuits, disciplinary actions. Nothing. Not a single trace. How does a respected psychologist with decades of research not exist? The next morning, something changed. 2 new items appeared on the bedside table. The recorder. And a manila folder labeled MPAT H, Phase 3. My name was printed on the tab. He had a file on me. Not a medical chart. A case file. That was the moment everything shifted. This assignment was no longer about patient care. It was about whatever he was doing to me. Tracking me. Predicting me. Learning what broke me. And I realized something terrifying. I wasn't his nurse. I was his subject. I wasn't supposed to be in his study without him. He never said it out loud, but the way his eyes followed me whenever I walked near the door made it clear, the study was off limits. Which only made me want to know what he was hiding in there. The room sat at the end of the hall, dark mahogany door, brass handle, no window. I passed by it every shift, feeling it pull at me like a gravity well. On the 7th night, I finally made up my mind. I waited until his medication kicked in and his breathing steadied into that deep, trance-like pattern. Then I slipped out of the guest suite and padded down the hall, barefoot, careful not to let the old floorboards creak. The study door opened with a soft click. I slipped inside and closed it behind me. The air felt different, colder, heavier. As though the room itself was holding its breath. I scanned the space. Bookshelves lining every wall. Academic journals, psychology textbooks, research binders with colored tabs sticking out like tongues. The entire office was meticulously organized, except for a large gray cabinet against the far wall. A cabinet with a small combination lock. 3 words were engraved on a metal plate. EMP program, Phase 3. My heart stuttered. That exact phrase was on the folder he placed on his bedside table. The same one with my name. I don't know how long I stared at the lock. Long enough for doubt to creep in. Maybe this is a violation of boundaries. Maybe I'll lose my license. Maybe I'm paranoid. But then I heard his voice replaying in my memory, low, calm, assured. You were already cracked. All I had to do was widen the fracture. No. I needed answers. I crouched down and pulled a bobby pin from my hair. I hadn't picked a lock since college, stupid dorm pranks, but muscle memory came back. Twist. Tension. Pressure on the tumblers. Click. The lock released. My breath hitched as I opened the cabinet. Inside were files, neatly organized, labeled alphabetically by last name. All nurses. All women. Each file had a photo clipped to the front and a short title beneath it. Maya Rios, Phase 1 conclusion, severe panic, admitted voluntarily. Jessica Hart, Phase 2 outcome, resignation, restraining order filed. Avery Klein, termination of subject due to noncompliance. Termination. The word made my stomach clench. My hand shook as I opened Avery's file. Inside were pages and pages of notes, observations, timestamps, predicted behaviors. But on the last page, at the bottom, one line was circled in red ink. She will not wake up. I dropped the folder as if it were burning me. I grabbed another at random, Elisa Tran. Last page. Her mind breaks at 4:42 a.m. Another. She screams before the sedation takes effect. I stumbled backward, the room blurring. He wasn't predicting behavior. He was documenting outcomes. My fingers hovered over the bottom shelf. There, marked with a red tab, was a thinner file. Mine. Read, Eleanor, subject number 12, Phase 3. My throat went dry. The folder trembled in my hands as I opened it. The first page was a list of personal details. Mother, Regina Reed, nurse, license number, past addresses, apartment security code. How did he get that? The next page held timestamps. Dates. Behavior logs. She touches her necklace when lying. She avoids eye contact when guilt is triggered. She leaves lights on when feeling watched. My stomach twisted so violently I nearly bent over. These weren't observations. They were patterns. He was building a map of my reactions, my habits, my weaknesses. Learning how to pull strings in my mind without ever touching me. I turned to the next page. There were predictions written in neat handwriting, his handwriting. She will look for answers in places she shouldn't. She will try to understand the experiment. She will keep coming back. My heartbeat was pounding so hard I could barely hear myself think. And then, the last page, only half filled. Just one line. She will finally confess at 3:11 a.m. Confess? Confess what? My vision blurred. The letters on the page warped and doubled. I tasted metal in my mouth, a panic attack rising fast and hard. Confess? He couldn't know. No one knew. 2 years ago, a patient coded unexpectedly on night shift. It wasn't my fault, but the nurse responsible had begged me to adjust the report, to soften the details. A small omission, she'd said. Just so the family doesn't sue. I falsified the note. A weak moment. A betrayal of ethics. A secret I promised myself I'd take to the grave. How could he possibly know? I closed the folder, pressing it against my chest like I could crush the words out of existence. Something in me broke open, fear, guilt, outrage mixing into something sharp and cold. This was never caregiving. This was conditioning. Mind mapping, emotional triggers, subconscious manipulation, all leading to one moment. 3:11 a.m. A confession. He wasn't predicting my future. He was engineering it. With trembling hands, I shoved the folder back, closed the cabinet, relocked it, and placed everything exactly as it was. I wiped the metal surface to hide fingerprints. Then I slipped out of the study. But as I reached the hallway, a voice emerged from the darkness. Low. Calm. I was curious how long it would take you to open that cabinet. I stopped breathing. Dr. Vexler sat in his wheelchair at the end of the hall, illuminated only by the dim night light. Eyes open. Awake. Watching me. Some subjects search earlier. Others. His lips curled into a soft, unnervingly satisfied smile. Require motivation. My pulse hammered wildly, but I forced my voice to steady. You're experimenting on me. I prefer the word revealing. He tilted his head as if studying a specimen in a jar. Confession cleanses the mind, Eleanor. Guilt is simply an unopened door. My hands were still shaking when I backed away, heart ricocheting off my ribs. But he wasn't done. In a whisper, like a surgeon laying out the next incision, he said, You'll be ready at 3:11. Sleep became impossible. Every night, I found myself trapped in the same hallway, cold, sterile, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I was sitting on the hard linoleum floor, a blood-stained report clutched in my hands. The edges of the paper curled in my fingers, but it wasn't just paper. It was my guilt, my shame, pressed into tangible form. The memory felt real, too real. My heart raced, my palms were slick, and I could almost hear the faint groans of patience in the background. I tried to tell myself it was a dream, but the sense of déjà vu was overwhelming. It wasn't just a memory. It was a buried moment I had locked away, a secret that my subconscious refused to let me ignore. I jolted awake one night, heart hammering. The apartment was dark. My own light, the one I always left on, was off. Everything seemed normal, yet I felt watched. The anticipation of the 3:11 a.m. prediction gnawed at my mind, like a countdown ticking louder in the quiet. Then, she appeared. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. A shadow in the doorway, moving with quiet precision. Eleanor, a soft voice whispered. It was a woman, older, dressed simply, her expression grave. Who are you? I whispered, my voice trembling. She stepped closer, her eyes darting nervously to the hall outside. I'm someone who needs to tell you the truth, she said. He only hires nurses who've lied. He says they make the best subjects. My stomach dropped. My mind reeled. 2 years ago, a patient had died unexpectedly under my watch. A colleague begged me to falsify a report, to soften the details. I had hesitated, but ultimately, I signed it. A small lie. A single lie. A secret buried deep in my records, never meant to be known. And now, someone had read it. Someone had given it to him. The woman placed a hand gently on my shoulder. He knows everything about you. Every hidden fault. Every mistake. He's been waiting for this moment. I sank to the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees. My chest felt heavy, suffocating. Every heartbeat throbbed in my ears. He had read my ethics report. A confidential, internal document that no one outside my former hospital should have seen. And somehow, here he was. Watching. Predicting. Pulling me into a trap of my own guilt. The next morning, I confronted him. I know what you're doing, I said, voice quivering, trying to sound steadier than I felt. You're using me. You've read my records. You know my secret. What is this? An experiment? He looked at me with that calm, unreadable smile, the kind that made your blood run cold. Confession cleanses the mind, he said softly. You of all people should know that, Nurse Reed. I wanted to argue, to scream, to tear him from his chair and demand answers. But his presence was magnetic, like gravity pulling my spine forward, compelling me to listen, to obey. Night fell again. The time approached, 3:11 a.m. I sat beside his bed, monitor readings glowing faintly in the dark room. My fingers hovered over the charts, over the pen, over the folder I had tried to avoid. My stomach twisted as I watched the second hand tick closer to the moment he had predicted. And then, it happened. The monitor flatlined. My breath caught in my throat. My hands froze. The room was filled with the cold beep, the alarm of clinical death. Panic clawed at me. My mind screamed, "This isn't real. He can't be dead. It's not time. It can't be." Then, a sound. My own voice. Clear, calm, unnervingly precise. "I forgive you." The words echoed from the recorder beside his bed. My own voice. The words I had whispered aloud weeks ago during one of the nightly observations, recorded without my knowing. The voice that I thought had belonged only to me had become the instrument of his experiment, of his prediction. My knees buckled. I sank to the floor, hands pressed to my face. The reality hit me like ice water. I wasn't the nurse. I wasn't the observer. I was the subject. The line between guilt and absolution blurred. The prediction had come true, but not in the way I had feared. I had confessed. And through that confession, through my own voice, I had been both witness and participant in the culmination of whatever Dr. Vexler had orchestrated. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, faintly, the steady beep of life returned. He wasn't gone. The flatline had been part of the test, part of the reveal. My pulse gradually slowed, my panic easing slightly, but the weight of what I had discovered pressed on me. He opened his eyes, looking at me with that calm, patient gaze that made the air feel thick and heavy. "You see, Eleanor," he said softly, "prediction is only the surface. It's what lies beneath that matters. Your mind revealed itself. You were never just caring for me. You were caring for yourself, uncovering truths you buried long ago." I couldn't answer. Words had abandoned me. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, 1,000 fears, and yet, an odd, chilling clarity settled in. I understood, finally, the reach of his experiment. The confession, the guilt, the secrets, he had known all along. And now, I had known too. The clock ticked past 3:11 a.m., and in the quiet of that dark room, I realized something profound and terrifying. Some experiments aren't about control. They're about reflection. And in mine, the reflection had stared back at me, unflinching, undeniable, and hauntingly familiar. The next morning, the sound of sirens shattered the uneasy calm of my apartment building. Police officers swarmed Dr. Vexler's home, their footsteps echoing through the halls. I stayed on the sidewalk, hands gripping the straps of my bag like a lifeline, watching as they carried bags of evidence, took photographs, and questioned the few staff he had left. But there was something unsettling in their eyes, a quiet confusion. They later told me what I already suspected. Every recording, every file, every note in that study had been wiped clean. The cabinet? Empty. His computer? A black screen with nothing left. Even the files in the empath program cabinet were gone, as if they had never existed. And Dr. Vexler himself, the autopsy revealed nothing. No stroke. No heart failure. No explanation. Just a man who had vanished from the rules of mortality, leaving behind only the questions he had planted in my mind. Weeks passed. I tried to return to my normal life. I went back to work, went home, kept my apartment lights off at night. But the feeling of being observed never left. Then, one afternoon, there was a small envelope slipped under my door. No return address. No handwriting I recognized. Just my name, typed in plain black letters. Inside was a single item, a flash drive. No note. No explanation. Only the label. Phase 4. I hesitated for a long moment. My fingers hovered over it. My rational mind screamed at me to throw it away, to call the police, to do anything except plug it in. But curiosity, that dangerous thread that had drawn me this far, overpowered my fear. I connected it to my laptop. The screen flickered, and a single file opened automatically. It was my voice. My own voice. Calm, steady, deliberate. He was supposed to be my patient. But maybe I was his. I froze. The words echoed in the quiet of my apartment, chilling me to the bone. It was the same tone, the same precision, the same unflinching clarity I had heard that night, the night of 3:11 a.m. I rewound the recording. Every word, every pause, every subtle inflection sounded like a mirror held up to my own subconscious. It hit me then. The experiment, the recordings, the predictions, it had never been about Dr. Vexler predicting my actions. He had trained me to reveal myself, layer by layer, until my secrets, my guilt, my deepest truths were no longer hidden. I wasn't just a nurse. I wasn't just a caretaker. I was the subject. The revelation both terrified and liberated me. I understood why he had chosen me, why he had known about the small lie, the falsified report, the habits I thought nobody noticed. He had orchestrated the perfect environment for me to confront my own mind, to confess not to him, but to myself. I sat back in my chair, hands shaking, heart pounding. The flash drive sat before me like a sealed box of truths I could no longer ignore. And in that moment, I realized. Everything he had done, the recordings, the predictions, even the flatline, was a reflection. Not of control, but of awareness. Not of domination, but of revelation. The thought made my stomach twist. I had always cared for others. I had always observed, documented, tried to soothe pain I couldn't always cure. But now, I saw the irony. I had been observed. And I had learned more about myself than I had about him. I closed my eyes. In the silence of my apartment, I replayed the recording over and over in my mind. The words settled deep inside me. He was supposed to be my patient. But maybe I was his. A shiver ran down my spine, a mixture of fear, awe, and understanding. I didn't need to see him again. His work, his experiment, was complete. The listener had become the observed. And in that quiet, haunting truth, I finally understood, some secrets aren't hidden. They're waiting. Waiting for the right person to notice, to reveal, and to listen. I found myself back in my apartment, the soft hum of the city outside a strange contrast to the storm that raged inside me. The flash drive lay open on my desk. I hit play again, and my own voice filled the room. He was supposed to be my patient. But maybe I was his. The words no longer startled me. They were a mirror, a key to the truth I had been avoiding. For weeks, I had believed the experiment was about prediction, that Dr. Vexler had somehow foreseen every thought, every action, every hesitation. But now I understood. It had never been about him predicting me. It had been about me revealing myself. Every twitch of my hand, every glance at a clock, every pang of guilt, every secret I thought buried, he had trained me, layer by layer, to confess them. Not to him, but to the part of myself I had kept hidden. I leaned back in my chair, shivering as the full weight of realization hit me. I was the experiment. The patient. The subject. The one being observed, mapped, and quietly molded. And in that moment, I understood the final truth, the confessions, the predictions, the flatline, the voice recordings, all of it had been a labyrinth leading me straight to my own subconscious. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with clarity. He hadn't trapped me. He had revealed me. I whispered to the empty room, almost to test my own voice. In every confession, there's a listener. A pause. The words lingered in the silence, heavy and real. But in mine, he was already waiting. The hum of my apartment felt distant. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift as if acknowledging the truth. And just like that, the loop closed. I realized something chilling, yet undeniable. some experiments aren't about control. They are about uncovering the self you never allowed yourself to see. Some listeners are not just hearing, they are preparing, waiting, guiding, shaping the confession before it even happens. I shut the laptop, my hands trembling slightly. The silence of my apartment was absolute. And yet, I felt seen. I felt exposed. I felt alive in a way I had never allowed myself to be before. The screen went black, and in my mind, the words lingered. The experiment had ended, but the reflection, the truth of who I was, would remain with me forever. If this story made you wonder how much people really know about you, if it made you pause and consider the secrets you keep and the truths you bury, subscribe and stay with the Silent Caretaker. Because every secret finds its listener, and every listener hides a secret.